Right now, somewhere on Earth, a human being is dying every 0.6 seconds. We have hospitals for it, religions for it, entire industries built around it. But 300,000 years ago, when the first modern humans walked out of Africa, they had none of that. And yet archaeologists keep finding the same thing at site after site after site. Deliberate burial, grave goods, flowers, ochre, the evidence of grief so old it predates our own species. Death was never just death to ancient humans. It was always something else. Let's start with what death actually looked like in the ancient world. Not the sanitized version, the real one. Your ancestor dies. Maybe it's a hunting injury that became infected. Maybe it's childbirth. Maybe it's a winter that lasted 3 weeks longer than expected. The body is there. The group is still moving. Predators are close. Every rational, survival-driven instinct says, leave it and keep walking. And yet they didn't. The fact that they didn't is one of the most important things archaeology has ever discovered about what it means to be human. Here is the assumption that the evidence destroys completely. We have always told ourselves that ritual, belief, and the emotional weight of death were things that came later. Products of civilization, of religion, of settled societies with enough surplus food to sit around and contemplate mortality. The timeline we assumed went something like this. Survival first, meaning second. But the archaeology doesn't support that timeline. Not even close. In 2023, a team of researchers announced the discovery of a burial site inside a cave in South Africa's Rising Star cave system. The species buried there was Homo naledi, a small-brained, small-bodied ancient human relative with a brain roughly 1/3 the size of yours. Not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals. Something older and more primitive by every measure we use. And yet there they were, deliberately placed in a deep cave chamber. Bodies positioned with intention, the same posture repeated across multiple individuals across what appears to be multiple burial events. The lead researcher, Berger, called it the oldest known mortuary practice on Earth, pushing deliberate burial back to at least 250,000 to 300,000 years ago, before our species existed. The need to do something with the dead is apparently not a product of big brains. It came first. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. Because Homo naledi didn't just bury their dead in any convenient location, they carried them deep into a cave system so dark, so complex, and so physically demanding to navigate that modern researchers needed specialized caving equipment and months of training to reach the burial chamber. That was not convenience. That was deliberate. That was chosen. Something in that small brain decided that the dead deserved a specific place, a hidden place, a deep place, and then did the physical work to put them there. Now let's move forward 200,000 years because by the time Neanderthals arrive in the archaeological record, the evidence becomes even harder to dismiss. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus was clear. Neanderthals were instinct-driven, reactive, incapable of the symbolic thought required for ritual. Then the excavations at Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq changed everything. Buried in the earth in a deliberately dug grave was a Neanderthal male, later called Shanidar 4. Around his body, pollen analysis revealed the remnants of at least 8 different flowering plant species. Groundsel, grape hyacinth, yarrow, ephedra. Several of them had known medicinal properties. Someone placed flowers on a grave 60,000 years ago. The debate about whether Neanderthals were cognitively capable of grief, of meaning, of ritual, that debate ended at Shanidar Cave. Now, here's the part that changes how you understand everything that came after. The flowers weren't random. Later analysis identified that the specific plants chosen weren't just locally available wildflowers. Several had documented healing properties used by traditional medicine practitioners in the same region thousands of years later. The people burying Shanidar 4 weren't just expressing grief. They were expressing hope, the idea that death might be something that healing could speak to, that placing medicinal plants on a body was meaningful. That is not instinct. That is belief. That is the earliest evidence of humans reaching towards something beyond what they could see. But before we continue, tell us in the comments, did you learn about Neanderthals in school and what did they tell you about them? Because what comes next is going to be very different from whatever that was. The ochre changes everything. Across burial sites spanning from South Africa to Europe to the Middle East, archaeologists keep finding the same thing. Bodies deliberately coated in red ochre, a powdered iron oxide pigment, before burial. At Skull Cave in Israel, 100,000-year-old burials show intentional ochre placement. At Lake Mungo in Australia, the oldest cremation ever found, 42,000 years ago, the bones were ground, gathered, and then buried with ochre applied after death. Whatever ochre meant to ancient humans, it meant the same thing on opposite sides of the planet without any contact between those populations. The color red was the color of death, or transformation, or what came after, for 100,000 years across every human culture that left a burial record. Here is what the evidence forces you to conclude. Ancient humans were not waiting for civilization to give them permission to feel loss. They were not waiting for a religion to tell them death mattered. The grief came first. The ritual came first. And everything we built afterward, every funeral tradition, every religious belief about what happens when we die, every gravestone and flower arrangement and last rite, all of it is downstream of something that started in a dark cave with a small-brained ancestor and a body that someone refused to simply leave behind. Now here's where modern archaeology makes its most uncomfortable finding. The burial practices of ancient humans weren't just emotionally sophisticated. They were operationally sophisticated. At Sunghir in Russia, dated to 34,000 years ago, researchers uncovered 2 children buried head-to-head, their bodies covered in more than 10,000 hand-drilled mammoth ivory beads. Each bead took an estimated 45 minutes to produce. That means someone spent roughly 7,500 hours, more than a full year of working daylight hours, producing grave goods for 2 children who would never use them. In a world where every hour was a survival calculation, where 7,500 hours could mean the difference between a group that made it through winter and one that didn't, someone chose to spend that time on the dead. That is not primitive. That is a value system. That is a society that had decided, collectively, that honoring the dead was worth the same investment as staying alive. Go back to the statistic you heard at the start. A human dying every 0.6 seconds. We have built entire civilizations around that number. Hospitals, hospices, funeral homes, grief counselors, life insurance, heaven, reincarnation, the Day of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, every religion that has ever promised something on the other side of dying. And all of it, every single layer of it, is the direct descendant of a Homo naledi carrying a body into a dark cave 300,000 years ago, and deciding, for reasons we will never fully know, that it mattered where that body went. The ancient human standing at the edge of that cave wasn't primitive. They weren't operating on instinct. They were doing exactly what you would do if you lost someone you loved and had nothing but your hands and the dark and the need to do something that felt equal to the size of what you had lost. Every grave ever dug is the same answer to the same question. And the question is 300,000 years old.